Welcome back to Too Young to Grieve, and today's episode is going to be a very special one. Probably one of the most important ones I've done since starting this podcast, and something that a lot of you have asked for. Now, at the start of the week, I put a question box up and asked what a lot of you are struggling with in your grief right now, and the responses were raw, honest, some painful, as expected, and some very thoughtful, but almost all of them very similar in ways. And that's because a lot of us are going through this journey together. We're all in this grief journey together. So today's episode is a Q&A episode. So thank you to everyone who sent questions in. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things. Whether grief actually gets easier, questioning life after grief, if there is an afterlife, guilt, anger, so many different things. I'm going to try and cover as many as I can. But this episode is not about perfect answers. It's about honest ones. Because when it comes to grief, there is no right or wrong way to grieve. We don't really get answers as such. But we just carry our grief differently over time and people at different points in their journeys. So before we dive into it, I just want to say, if this podcast has helped you in any way, even in the smallest way, which I hope it has, it genuinely means the world when you follow, subscribe, rate, or share it, because it helps us reach other people who might be grieving quietly just like we are. So thank you if you've already done that, and thank you if you choose to after listening to today's episode. But without further ado, let's start with one of the first questions that came up, and one of the questions that actually came up the most. And that is, does it actually ever get easier? And this question holds a lot of weight. It holds a lot of fear, which I think we can all relate to, because you're not really asking about grief in this question. I've come to realize you're asking about survival for yourself, for others around you. You're asking whether pain is going to define the rest of your life, whether you're always going to feel this heavy, this weight, and whether you're going to actually ever feel joy, and whether joy is ever going to feel safe again as well. And the honest answer, from my perspective, is that grief doesn't get easier, let's say, in the way that people often promise. Over time it's going to get easier. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't just fade into like a distant memory. And it doesn't suddenly become something that no longer hurts. But what changes is not the grief, but it's you. At the beginning, grief feels like it's taken over your whole life, your whole entire nervous system. Your chest, often feels tight. Your stomach feels a little unsettled. Your mind feels very foggy, like just nothing is going on in there. And your thoughts are just scattered all over the place. And your body, it impacts your body. It feels tired in ways that sleep doesn't fix, resting doesn't fix. And the reason being, you're not only missing the person, but you're missing who you were when they were alive as well. You're missing that version that we might often say, do I go back to normal? That normal version of yourself. Or the version of life where things felt certain and felt safe. And what people say is time heals. But time does not heal grief. Time teaches you how to carry it better and without collapsing. So you slowly learn how to sit with the pain without panicking like you might have done at the start. You learn how to breathe with the memories instead of fighting them. You enjoy hearing that song that you once listened to with them. You enjoy looking at the photos again. And you learn how to hold that sadness, that grief, without losing yourself in it. And what happens is one day you realize you can feel grief and you can still feel joy and you can still laugh. You can feel the grief and still plan ahead. You can feel grief and still want things from your life. So, in answer to that question, grief does not get smaller or easier, but you grow and you grow around it. And to me, that's what easier actually means. It means that you can carry your grief better, you can remember them, but it doesn't feel as heavy over time. So I hope that answers question number one. Question number two was something that I've had thoughts about recently as well. I've had experiences, I've thought different things. Over time, I've become more open to it. And I even had a conversation with someone the other day about this type of thing. And this question was, since my loved one passed, I've questioned the afterlife and the meaning of life more than ever. Is that normal? And yes, it is normal. It is one of the most natural reactions to loss, because grief doesn't only take the person. It takes away certainty, it takes away safety. It takes away you thinking that things are as they are. Before loss, what happens is most of us move through life with quiet assumptions. We assume tomorrow is just going to be tomorrow. It exists. We assume that people will stay forever. We assume that there is time. But what loss and what grief does is it breaks those assumptions. And suddenly the mind starts searching for meaning, because the heart is searching for reassurance. So we ask things like, where are they now? Do they still exist in some form? Is love stronger than death? Is this really the end? And these questions are not about religion or philosophy, but they're about attachment. And what I mean by that is love does not feel temporary. So loss feels impossible to accept. We think that that person is going to be here forever. The love is going to be here forever, which it is, because grief is love with nowhere to go. It's just in a different form. So what grief often does is it humbles us. It removes that illusion that we understand how life works. We understand death. We understand time or purpose. And it reminds us how little control that we actually have. And that's something that I've had to come to terms with recently, is that most things in our life are out of our control. And grief and loss is obviously one of the worst things that is out of our control. So for me, grief didn't give me answers to that, but it gave me a deeper respect and curiosity for mystery. And I realized something important in that. Even if I don't know where they are, if there is an afterlife, I know where they live. They live in our values, they live in our choices, they live in the way that we love, in the courage that we find when we don't feel our strongest or we're having bad days. And to me, that means that grief makes you question meaning, because that love made life meaningful. And to me, that's how I'm going to answer that question. Because I've thought about afterlife. I've thought about, can I speak to them? I've seen things about people saying, can I speak to them? I've questioned the meaning of life before. I've said, is there any point to this? What is the point without them in it? And that is normal. But also at the same time, they are still alive. There is an afterlife, and it's through you carrying their legacy forward in everything that you do. The next question was, do you ever stop missing them? And in short, no. You're never going to stop missing someone that you loved so deeply. But what happens is the missing feeling changes shape. At first, you miss their presence in the room, their voice, their physical existence, the way that they made life feel familiar, the way that they helped you in certain situations. You could get their advice, you could ring them up. But what happens is that later, you miss moments, you miss conversations, reactions, advice. And for me, one of the hardest things is that you eventually miss futures that never got the chance to exist. So for me, hopefully one day, weddings, kids, success in life in different ways. You miss who they would have been, who you would have been with them still here. Experiences that now you can only really imagine. So, missing never leaves, but it just becomes quieter. It becomes something that, as grief is, you carry instead of something that completely crushes you. And one day you realize that missing is not something to escape, but it's something that proves that that relationship, that love, it was real, it was deep, it was meaningful. So, in short, you don't stop missing them, but you stop drowning in that missing feeling. And that relates to you getting better at carrying it over time and growing with the grief. The fourth question, which came up quite a lot, is it normal to feel angry in grief? And the answer is yes, completely. Anger in grief is one of the least talked about parts of loss, I think. Because people just expect you to be sad, to be crying all the time, to be depressed, but they don't expect rage and anger. And when we talk about anger and grief, it doesn't mean physical anger, punching things, doing different things in relation to anger. It's anger at timing. It's anger at the situation, anger at life, at the universe, at fate, at how unfair that it all feels. And sometimes it can even be anger at the person for leaving, followed immediately by the guilt for then thinking that for a lot of us. But what I would like you to understand is that anger is not hatred. Anger is grief trying to protect your heart. Anger is love saying that this wasn't supposed to happen. Why did that happen to them? Why did it have to happen to me? And when anger is judged or suppressed, it doesn't disappear. It can just turn into things like bitterness, resentment, or emotional shutdown. And that's not good for anybody. But when the anger is allowed and you feel it, it softens. Because I want you to understand that anger doesn't make you cruel. It makes you a human who's in pain. And if you feel anger at the grief that you've had to experience, it's human. It's a normal feeling, a normal response to grief. And you're not weird for feeling those feelings of anger. The next question that I wanted to touch upon was, why do I feel guilty when I start enjoying life again? And I think that this is something that a lot of us feel. Because for a lot of us, grief creates a false belief that joy is betraying the person that we've lost. You might laugh and then immediately feel bad. How am I laughing while I'm grieving someone who's gone, who can't laugh with me? You might enjoy a moment and then feel disloyal. How am I enjoying this holiday or this trip and they're not here to see it? You might feel like happiness means that you're forgetting them. How can I be happy? The person that I love so deeply isn't here. But happiness doesn't erase that love that you had. Happiness doesn't replace memories. Happiness doesn't cancel out your grief. Your loved one did not love you so much so you could live in suffering forever. Let me say that again. Your loved one did not love you so you could live in suffering forever. They loved you so that you could live. And they'd still want you to live, even if they're not here. Because joy is not a rejection of loss. Joy is a continuation of love. You're allowed to carry grief and happiness in the same body. You are allowed to do that. It's not betrayal. It's just survival. And they would want you to live your life and carry them forward. Live the life that they didn't get to live. And I know people will say to you, they wouldn't want you to be sad. They wouldn't want you to be this, that. That's not the case. You can feel the emotions that you feel throughout your grief journey. But you can also build a life with your grief and carry them forward with it as well. But that happens in your own time. So if you're not ready to do that yet, take your time. Grief has no timeline. But also understand that we do feel guilty at times for feeling that joy. I've felt it. I know others have felt it too. And you're normal for feeling that guilt. But also over time, you'll realize you don't have to feel guilty for feeling like you're moving forward with them. Because that's what you're doing. You're not forgetting them. You're moving forward with them. Remember that. The next question that I got quite a lot was, why do I feel so lonely even when I'm surrounded by people? And that really, really stuck with me, that question. It resonated so deeply because I've had the exact same feeling plenty of times, especially at the beginning of my journey with grief. And it relates to your internal reality. Grief completely changes your internal reality, and people might still see the same face, the same person, but they don't see the same world that you now carry inside of you. Grief has completely shifted your internal reality and perspectives, but you still look the same. And people who haven't been through grief might not get that. Because to you, you see fragility, you see endings, you see time completely differently. You've seen how quickly things can change and how short life is. But some people haven't seen that. In particular, for those who are listening who are young grievers and are surrounded by people who potentially haven't lost anyone yet, and hopefully they don't have to anytime soon. But when people talk about small problems, you just feel disconnected. And it's not because you're cold, but it's because you've learned how heavy life can be. And when someone starts talking to you about how they got stuck in traffic, or how they weren't able to get the thing in the sale that they wanted, to you that's just the most minor thing ever. But to them, that's something big. And that's just how perspectives work and how grief changes yours and changes your internal feelings about things. So, loneliness in grief is not about being unwanted. It's about being changed. And that's what grief does to us. It changes us in ways that we might not understand at first. And it's more about carrying a depth that not everyone around you has experienced yet. So when you feel lonely, it's not that you're weird, but you've just experienced something that people around you might not have experienced yet. And it's changed you for that. So that's why you might feel lonely, even when you're surrounded by people that you love and that you've been close with for ages, and it just feels slightly different. But over time, people will understand you better. You might open up to them more, and they understand why you think certain things, why you behave in certain ways. And that really helps with that lonely feeling that you might feel as well. But if you do feel lonely at this moment in time, even when you are surrounded by people, I get you. I've been there too. But you're not alone in it. You're not alone in feeling that way. And the right people will understand you. Question number 7 is a really big one, and it's a difficult one to answer. But it's, has grief changed who you are forever? Now, for me, I always say that there's a life before grief and a life after grief. But when it comes to that question, has grief changed who you are forever? Yes, but not in the way that people might fear. Because grief does not erase you. It doesn't take away the fact that you've still got a life to live as well. But what it does do is it reshapes you. It changes you. And some things can be for the better. And that might be hard to hear, but it does give you different perspectives. It does change what matters to you. It deepens your empathy. It sharpens your awareness of things. It changes what you value. Before grief, I can admit it, I can hold my hands up. I was quite a materialistic person. I would always want the new designer clothes, the best trainers. I'd spend money on things like that. Want a better car. Now, I couldn't care less. But one of the biggest things that it does is it changes what you tolerate. And after experiencing something so heavy and something so life-changing, you don't tolerate a lot of the nonsense that you might have done before. It removes that innocence from you, but it also gives you more understanding of things. And I think that's something so beautiful to have gained, giving you the perspective and the understanding of things that people might not have yet. And you can pass that on to people. You can allow them to appreciate things that they might not yet. You can allow them to change their perspective on things that they might think, wow, I never thought like that. But you're right. And none of us would ever choose this transformation. We would do anything to have that person back. But that transformation, it just becomes part of you. And you're not weaker because of grief, even though it might not feel like it right now. You might feel like there's no way out of this. Or you might feel like you are weaker. You're just more aware of what actually matters. And that's how I think that grief changes you. So let me know what your thoughts are on that as well in the comments. But the next question is, why do I compare my grief to other people's grief? And I think that's such a brilliant question. Because I've done it before. I know other people who've done it before. And I know a lot of people will resonate with that question. And I think that is because we're trying to justify our pain. We tell ourselves that other people lost more, they suffered more, they endured more, and therefore our grief must be smaller. We see people who maybe are further ahead in their journey and are doing things, and we're like, how are they doing those? Why can't I do that yet? Why am I still feeling this when they're feeling okay? They look like they're doing okay. But you've got to remember that grief is not measured by circumstances. timelines. It's measured by attachment. And your grief is valid no matter what, because your love was real. And I want you to know that comparison doesn't heal grief. All it does is it silences it. Because you think that your grief is nothing in comparison to someone else's. So you shouldn't be feeling the way that you're feeling. But grief, trauma, loss, it's the same for anyone who's going through it. So you shouldn't compare to anyone else just because you think yours is lesser than theirs. You have the right to feel however you're feeling right now in your grief journey. And whatever you feel, you can feel that. You're allowed to feel that way. It's normal. You're human. So don't compare to anyone else who's grieving, because your grief is unique to you and everyone grieves differently. Remember that. So the last two questions that I'm going to go through. What do you wish people told you at the beginning? Now there's a lot that I wish people told me. But the main one that I want to talk about is I wish someone told me that grief is not something that you fix. Grief is something that you learn to live alongside. And I wish that someone had told me that at the start. I wish someone told me that I was not weak for still hurting years later, months later. That I was not broken for feeling lost. I was not behind for needing some more time with things that people potentially thought I didn't. And I wish someone told me that surviving grief quietly, day by day, is still surviving. Because for myself, I thought I should be further along in things. I should be fixed by now. I should be healed. Why am I still crying years later? Why am I still thinking about them years later? Why do I still get these feelings of numbness, of confusion, of why did that have to happen? And the answer is that that's grief. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't get fixed. There's no finish point to grief where everything just goes back to normal. Unfortunately, we can't fix grief. Grief, as we've said many times before in this podcast, and you probably heard, is love with nowhere to go. So how can you fix something that is so deep and so meaningful? And that's what I wish I was told at the beginning. Because now I carry my grief knowing that I'm carrying my dad with me. I'm carrying his legacy forward. I'm living the life that he would want to live. I'm not trying to wake up every day and find new things to fix it or to get over it. Because you don't. And that's grief. It's not something to be fixed. And the last question. What do you do when grief leaves you feeling empty? And it's a good question, because I still have days where I feel numb, I feel empty. But sometimes grief isn't sadness. It is that numbness. It just is. But that numbness isn't a lack of feeling. It relates to the physical aspect. It's the nervous system protecting itself from being overloaded. Grief can chuck a load of feelings, emotions, physical things at you that are difficult to deal with, especially all at once. So when you feel empty, it doesn't mean that you're just finished or fixed or like nothing else is going to come after this. It just means that your mind and your body are trying to rest from that pain. And the main thing that I want you to take from the answer to this question is that empty isn't the end. It's just a pause. It's a pause from you feeling the heavy feelings of grief. And those pauses, they're part of healing. So if you ever feel empty, if you ever feel numb, it's part of the grief process. It's okay. And you can just sit with that feeling. It's part of it. Wow, that was 10 of the most common questions that I was asked. I really hope that the answers have helped you, have made you feel more understood, and have given you a bit more clarity and direction on certain things related to grief. So, if any part of this episode felt like it spelt, I can't even speak now, I've answered too many questions. If any part of this episode felt like it spoke directly to you, I just want you to know that you're not alone. You're not behind. You're just grieving. And that is one of the bravest things as a human being you can do. So if this episode helped you, please consider following the podcast if you're not already, subscribing to the channel, rating it, liking it, or sharing it with someone who might need it. Because it genuinely helps this reach other people who are grieving quietly and feel a bit misunderstood in that grief. So thank you for trusting me with your questions, and thank you for staying